Ah, the East India Company. A name synonymous with exotic spices, fine silks and, oh yes, brutal conquest and corporate greed. It all started so innocently, of course, just a group of plucky English merchants looking to make a quick buck or a million in the East Indies. Who knew they would end up running an entire subcontinent? Talk about a hostile takeover. The East India Company's story is a cautionary tale, a reminder that unchecked ambition and the relentless pursuit of profit can have devastating consequences. But hey, at least they brought us tea, right? Don't be fooled. The year was 1600, a time of grand ambitions and even grander schemes. Queen Elizabeth I, never one to miss an opportunity for a little royal profit, granted a charter to the Governor and Company of Merchants of London trading into the East Indies. This was no small gesture. It was a calculated move to expand England's influence and wealth. Their mission? Secure those lucrative spices the Europeans couldn't get enough of. Spices were more than just flavour. They were a symbol of status and power. Pepper, cloves, nutmeg, you name it, they wanted it. These spices were worth their weight in gold, driving men to the ends of the earth, and they were willing to sail halfway across the world to get it. The voyages were perilous, fraught with danger, but the potential rewards were too great to ignore. Of course, this being the age of exploration, read exploitation, things weren't exactly going to be polite requests and fair trades. The quest for spices often led to conflict, coercion and conquest, but that's a story for another time. The seeds of a vast empire were being sown, and the world was about to change forever.
The early days of the company were all about establishing trading posts, forging alliances, sometimes through less than savoury means, and of course, maximising profits. They were relentless in their pursuit of dominance. They started small, these supposed humble merchants, but their ambitions were anything but humble. But, like a particularly aggressive strain of ivy, they quickly began to spread their influence across the Indian subcontinent. Their reach extended far and wide, altering the course of history. Little did anyone know this was just the beginning of a corporate empire, the likes of which the world had never seen. The East India Company would go on to shape the destinies of nations and the lives of millions.
Here's a fun fact. The East India Company had its own army. Yes, you read that right. A private company with its own military force, and not just a small security detail, mind you. We're talking tens of thousands of soldiers, both European and Indian sepoys, armed with muskets, cannons, and a healthy dose of corporate-sponsored ambition. This private army was instrumental in the company's rise to power. It allowed them to protect their trading interests, bully local rulers, and eventually conquer vast swathes of territory. Because who needs a real government when you have a well-armed corporation on your side?
The company's army was a force to be reckoned with, feared and resented in equal measure. They were the muscle behind the corporation's ambitions, the iron fist inside the velvet glove of trade agreements and diplomatic niceties. After all, nothing says let's do business quite like the implied threat of cannons and muskets.
Once you've conquered a territory, you have to govern it. But governing a vast and diverse land like India was no small feat. The East India Company wasn't exactly known for its democratic principles. Instead, it operated with a singular focus on control and profit. They ran their territories like the business they were, focused on maximising profit, minimising expenses and keeping those pesky shareholders happy. Every decision was made with the company's financial health in mind. This led to a rather unique system of governance where British law was enforced, taxes were collected with ruthless efficiency, and local customs and traditions were, well, let's just say they weren't exactly top priority. The local populace often found their age-old traditions clashing with the new rules imposed by their foreign rulers.
Imagine a government run by accountants where the bottom line was the only thing that mattered. Policies were crafted not for the welfare of the people, but for the profitability of the company. That's essentially what the East India Company's rule in India was like. It was a corporate empire where the balance sheets dictated the lives of millions. It was a system that benefited the company and its shareholders immensely, while often leaving the local population to grapple with the consequences. The disparity between the rulers and the ruled grew wider with each passing year. But hey, at least the books were balanced, right? The company's financial success was often touted as a justification for their methods.
The local population, meanwhile, had to navigate a new reality, a reality where their voices were often unheard and their needs unmet. One where their traditions and ways of life were often sidelined in favor of profit margins and corporate interests. The cultural and social fabric of the society was under constant strain. It was a challenging time, but resilience and hope kept the spirit of the people alive, even in the face of such overwhelming odds. Despite the hardships, the local communities found ways to adapt and persevere, holding on to their heritage and identity.
Section 5. Profit over people. The exploitation of India's riches. Let's not beat around the bush. The East India Company's primary goal was profit. They were a commercial enterprise, and their main objective was to maximize returns for their shareholders. And they weren't afraid to exploit India's resources and people to achieve it. They saw India as a vast land of untapped wealth, ripe for the taking.
They forced farmers to grow cash crops like indigo and opium, crops that were highly profitable in the global market, often at the expense of food crops, leading to widespread famine. They monopolized trade, controlling the flow of goods and dictating prices, crushing local industries and enriching themselves. Local artisans and craftsmen found it impossible to compete with the company's might.
And they did it all with the blessing of the British Crown, which provided them with military support and political backing, which was more than happy to turn a blind eye to the company's excesses as long as the riches kept flowing back to England. The wealth extracted from India fueled the British economy and funded their global ambitions.
The human cost of the company's pursuit of profit was staggering. Families were torn apart, communities were devastated, millions suffered under their rule, their lives disrupted, their livelihoods destroyed. The social fabric of India was irreparably damaged.
But hey, those spices and silks weren't going to pay for themselves, were they? The demand for luxury goods in Europe was insatiable. At least that's what the company's shareholders probably told themselves as they sipped their tea and counted their profits. They were far removed from the suffering their wealth was built upon. Section 6. The Battle of Plassey. A victory for whom exactly? The Battle of Plassey in 1757 was a turning point in the East India Company's history. It was a decisive victory against the Nawab of Bengal and his French allies, cementing the company's control over Bengal, a region with immense wealth and resources. Of course, this victory was achieved through a combination of military might, cunning diplomacy, and a healthy dose of good old-fashioned bribery. The Battle of Plassey is often hailed as a great British victory, but in reality it was more of a corporate takeover. It marked the moment when the East India Company transitioned from a trading company to a full-fledged colonial power, and it set the stage for the next century of British rule in India, a period marked by both progress and exploitation. Section 7. Modernization or misery. The company's mixed legacy in India. The East India Company's legacy in India is a complex and contested one. On the one hand, they did introduce some modernizing reforms, such as improving infrastructure and establishing a more efficient judicial system. But these reforms were often implemented with the primary goal of strengthening their control and maximizing their profits, not necessarily for the benefit of the Indian people.
On the other hand, their rule was marked by widespread exploitation, brutal oppression, and a systematic disregard for Indian culture and traditions. They plundered India's wealth, leaving a legacy of economic hardship that continues to this day. So, were they modernizers or exploiters? The answer, like most things in history, is complicated.
Section 8. From Tea to Tech. The East India Company's echoes in the modern world. It's easy to dismiss the East India Company as a relic of a bygone era, but the truth is their story holds some uncomfortable parallels to the modern world. We live in an age of multinational corporations with unprecedented power and influence. Companies that span the globe, control vast amounts of data, and wield significant economic and political clout.
Just like the East India Company of old, these modern-day behemoths are driven by profit, often at the expense of ethical considerations and the public good. They amass wealth and power, influencing governments and shaping the lives of billions.
The East India Company's story serves as a stark reminder of what can happen when corporate power goes unchecked. It's a cautionary tale for our times, a reminder that we must be vigilant in holding these modern-day empires accountable.
Section 9. Conclusion. A cautionary tale of corporate power. The East India Company may be long gone, but their story is far from over. It serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked corporate power. It's a story of greed, ambition, and the exploitation of an entire subcontinent in the pursuit of profit. It's a story that should give us pause as we navigate a world increasingly dominated by powerful corporations. Let's learn from the past, lest we repeat its mistakes.